Hi, I'm Jonah, and this is a Discover New Sounds for the pentatonic major scale. And the major scales have they're a lot more lively and upbeat than compared to the minor scales. The minor scales have a lot more emotion in them. So like the minor scale would be the first scale that we all learn to play on the native flute is a pentatonic minor scale. And so this is the major scale, so this one's a little more lively and upbeat. Now I'm going to show you two different ways to play this, and they both have their advantages and disadvantages. And learning to play both ways has an advantage as well. So the first way I'm going to show you is as the what's called the relative pentatonic major scale, and it starts on this note as the first note in the scale, or the tonic note. And the advantage of this way of playing it is the fingerings are a lot more simplistic. There isn't any cross fingering. It's a lot easier the cross fingering that there is more simplistic. So there is some cross fingering, but it's a much simpler way to play the scale technically. And the disadvantage is there's not as many notes as there are when you play it starting with this note, which is the other way that I'm going to show you. This note is the tonic note, the first note in the scale. And the advantage here is there's more notes, but the disadvantage is that it's more challenging, and technically there's a half hole and there's a lot of cross fingerings. So each has their place. Now the advantage of learning both is that you can play in different keys, because with this note as with this note as your tonic note, or the first note, you're playing in one key. So for example, on this flute, which is an A, you'd be playing in the key of A. Now when I switch to this note being my tonic note, or my first note, my scale, now I'm playing in the key of C. So there's an advantage of being able to play in different keys, especially when you're playing with other people. It just gives you more variety to play with. So I'm going to show you the fingerings physically on the flute, and then we'll look at the fingering charts, and then I'll play some improvisation examples of each scale. So this is the fingering for the relative major pentatonic scale, which is the tonic note for this scale, or the first note in the scale starts here. And this one, the fingerings is a lot less technically challenging. So it goes like this. This is the fingering chart for the relative pentatonic major scale. And as you could see kind of when I was playing it, it looks very similar to the pentatonic minor scale, that scale we all first learn when we're learning to play the native flute, except that we start on the second note up, and then we walk right up the scale just like you would the pentatonic minor. And then when you get to the top note, you jump over the octave to this note here. And there's a couple things about this note. One is that it's a fingering that some of you may not have played before, and so teaching your fingers technically how to catch this note, it might take a little bit of time. And then also when you jump over the octave, when you go above the high note, sometimes it takes a little bit of a harder tonguing, and more of what's called a staccato, or just like a real poignant tonguing. So a real t versus a ta ta. You want to get kind of a t. And you'll have to experiment with your flute as to how hard you need to tongue it to get over the octave. Some flutes are more responsive to go over the octave than others. So this is the major pentatonic scale with all the holes covered being your tonic note. So it looks like this. So as you can see, it's a little more challenging dexterily, where you have to do this half holing to kind of a cross fingering, or closing that half hole. And there's a lot of challenging fingerings dexterily with your fingers, technically. And yet it gives you some extra notes to play with. So it's kind of, it's a cool scale to work with. But if your fingers are still kind of new at all these different combinations, give yourself some time and some patience with learning this one. So this is the fingering chart for the pentatonic major scale. And this scale is technically challenging fingering-wise. There's the half hole here, and then you do somewhat of a cross fingering, closing that half hole and opening this hole. And then you're walking up to notes that maybe you haven't played before, like this one. And then you're jumping over the octave to play these notes. So it's got a lot technically going on here. And again, when you go over the octave, you might need to tongue your flute a little more poignantly, more of a ta-ta rather than a ta-ta, to get it to pop over the octave there. I think really the biggest challenge here is catching that half hole so it sounds clean. It can kind of sound wavery when you don't catch it quite right. And if you notice, I tend to move my finger to the side, and I actually do like a little bit of a lift and a move, and I actually lift and put it back down instead of trying to slide. I find that I can catch the hole more accurately and with better precision, or like more consistently, so I should say, when I do it that way. And so here's what it looks like. And then here I do it again in slow motion. So you can see how I kind of lift my finger to catch that half hole rather than sliding or rolling. And some people will catch it moving their finger downwards to catch the half hole. I find it more consistent to go sideways like that. It's also a little easier muscularly with my finger. So give it a try a bunch of different ways. Playing in the mirror might be helpful, so you can kind of get a visual of what you're doing as well.